She pressed her palm against the glass, tears streaming down her face, never expecting that a 400-pound gorilla would press his hand right back and hold it there, as if he knew exactly what she needed in that moment. This is the story of how one woman's darkest day became her most profound awakening, and how a creature we call wild showed more humanity than most humans ever could. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and on that grey October morning, she had no reason to be alive. At least, that's what the voice in her head kept telling her. 3 months earlier, she'd buried her 6-year-old daughter Emma. A car accident, sudden, senseless. The kind of tragedy that doesn't just break you, it erases you piece by piece until you can't recognize your own reflection anymore. Sarah had stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, stopped pretending that life had meaning. Her husband couldn't look at her anymore without seeing the empty space where their little girl used to be. And somewhere, in the fog of grief, their marriage had dissolved like sugar in rain. He moved out. She didn't fight it. Fighting required energy she didn't have, purpose she couldn't find. The apartment felt like a tomb. Every corner held a memory. Emma's drawing still stuck to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets, her tiny shoes by the door. The pediatrician's appointment reminder still pinned to the calendar, a date that would never come. Sarah had made a decision that morning. She'd written the note, left it on the kitchen counter, and walked out the door with no intention of coming back. But something stopped her. Not hope. Hope was a luxury for people who still believed in tomorrows. It was something smaller, quieter, a whisper of a memory. 2 years ago, before the world turned to ash, she'd taken Emma to the city zoo. It was Emma's birthday, and the little girl had been obsessed with gorillas ever since watching a nature documentary. She talked about them for weeks, her eyes lighting, up with that pure, unfiltered joy only children possess. "Mommy, did you know gorillas can be gentle giants? Did you know they have families just like us?" At the zoo, they'd stood in front of the gorilla habitat for nearly an hour. Emma's small hand in hers, her face pressed against the viewing glass, completely mesmerized by a massive silverback named Binti. He sat there with a dignity that seemed almost human, watching over his family group with eyes that held an ancient intelligence. Sarah hadn't thought about that day in months, but standing in her empty apartment, keys in hand, ready to drive somewhere far away and let go of everything, that memory surfaced like a gasp of air after drowning. She found herself driving to the zoo instead. It made no sense. The rational part of her brain, the part still functioning through the medication and the grief, told her this was absurd. But she didn't care anymore about making sense. She just needed to be somewhere Emma had been happy. One last time before the end. The zoo was nearly empty on a Wednesday morning. School groups wouldn't arrive until afternoon, and the October chill kept most visitors away. Sarah bought a ticket with trembling hands, barely registering the cheerful attendant's greeting, and walked the familiar path toward the great ape house. Her body moved on autopilot, following the same route she and Emma had taken that bright summer day. But everything looked different now, drained of color, as if she were watching the world through a grey filter. The sounds felt distant. The other visitors seemed like ghosts. Then she rounded the corner, and there he was. Binti, the silverback. Sitting in almost the exact same position as he had 2 years ago, his massive frame relaxed but alert, his intelligent eyes scanning his habitat. He was alone in the viewing area at that moment, separated from his family group who were foraging in the back section of the enclosure. Sarah approached the glass slowly, her legs barely supporting her weight. She felt ridiculous, a grown woman seeking comfort from an animal behind glass. But she came anyway, drawn by something she couldn't name. She stopped about 3 feet from the viewing window and just stood there, staring at this magnificent creature. Binti didn't react at first. He sat there, chewing slowly on some vegetation, occasionally glancing around his enclosure. Just being. Existing in a way Sarah envied, without the crushing weight of human consciousness, without the torture of memories that wouldn't fade. Then something shifted. Binti stopped chewing. His head turned slowly, deliberately, until his eyes locked onto Sarah's. Not a casual glance, a direct, sustained gaze that seemed to pierce through the glass, through her defenses, straight into the wounded core of her being. Sarah felt her breath catch. She'd looked at animals before, of course, but this was different. This wasn't the vacant stare of a creature looking through you. This was recognition, connection, as if those dark, soulful eyes could see every broken piece inside her. Without thinking, without planning, Sarah took a step forward, then another, until she was right against the glass, so close she could see the silver threading through Binti's black fur, the weathered wisdom in his face, the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. And then she did something she hadn't done in months. Something she'd been holding back because once it started, she feared it would never stop. She broke. The tears came sudden and violent, ripping through her chest like a physical force. Her knees buckled, and she sank down until she was sitting on the floor in front of the glass, her whole body shaking with sobs she'd been suppressing since the funeral. The kind of grief that has no sound at first, just silent convulsions before the wails begin. She pressed her palm against the glass, not knowing why, just needing something solid to hold on to as the wave crashed. Over her, and through her blurred vision, she saw Binti move. The massive gorilla stood up, all 400 pounds of him, and walked directly toward her. Not rushed, not aggressive, purposeful, intentional. He crossed his enclosure in 4 long strides and sat down on his side of the glass, directly opposite Sarah, and then he did something that made time stop. He raised his enormous hand and pressed it against the glass, exactly where Sarah's hand was. Palm to palm, separated only by an inch of reinforced glass. Sarah's crying stopped abruptly, shock overriding grief. She stared at their hands, her small, pale fingers dwarfed by his massive, leathery palm, and Binti just held it there, completely still, his eyes never leaving hers. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't random animal behavior. Every fiber of Sarah's being knew it. He was trying to reach her, to comfort her, to tell her, in the only way he could, that he saw her pain. She didn't know how long they sat like that. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. Time dissolved into something else, a moment outside of moments, a connection that transcended species and circumstance. Sarah's other hand came up, pressing against the glass too. And Binti, this creature that could tear a person apart without effort, remained completely gentle, completely present. His breathing had slowed. His expression, if such a thing could be read on a gorilla's face, looked almost soft. Tears continued to stream down Sarah's cheeks, but they were different now, not the violent sobs of despair, but something else, something that felt almost like release. "I lost her," Sarah whispered, her voice cracked and raw. "I lost my baby girl." Binti tilted his head slightly as if listening. His hand remained pressed against the glass. "I don't know how to keep going," she continued, the words spilling out in a broken confession to this wild creature who couldn't understand her language but seemed to understand everything. "Every morning I wake up and remember she's gone, and it's like losing her all over again, every single day. I can't do it anymore, I can't." A sound emerged from Binti then, low, soft, rumbling in his chest. Not aggressive, not a warning. It sounded almost like empathy, like whatever gorillas do when they're trying to soothe their young. Sarah remembered something Emma had told her, something from that nature documentary. "Mommy, gorillas have feelings too. They get sad when someone in their family dies. They understand." At the time, Sarah had smiled indulgently, the way parents do when children anthropomorphize animals. But now, sitting here with this magnificent being holding his hand to hers, she wondered if Emma had understood something profound that adults often forget. We're not so different, are we? We all love, we all lose, we all grieve. Binti's family group began emerging from the back area of the enclosure, 2 females and a juvenile. They approached cautiously, curious about what the silverback was doing, but Binti didn't move. He made another low sound, and the others kept their distance, as if understanding that something important was happening. A small crowd had started to gather behind Sarah, other zoo visitors drawn by the unusual sight of the massive gorilla sitting so still, so focused on one person. But Sarah barely noticed them. Her entire world had narrowed to this moment, this connection. "You've lost someone too, haven't you?" Sarah asked, softly, remembering reading somewhere that Binti had lost his first mate years ago to illness. "You know what this feels like." Binti blinked slowly, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that felt impossible to break. And in that impossible moment, something shifted inside Sarah. Not healing. Grief doesn't work that way, doesn't disappear because of one beautiful moment. But something cracked open, a tiny fissure in the wall of despair she'd built around herself, because if this creature could carry loss and still be present, still be gentle, still show up for his family every day, maybe she could too. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. "I miss her so much," Sarah whispered, her forehead now resting against the glass. "I miss her every second." Binti made that soft, rumbling sound again. His other hand came up, and he placed both palms against the glass now, as if trying to embrace her through the barrier. Sarah don't know how long they stayed like that. At some point, a zookeeper approached, a young woman with kind eyes who'd been watching from a distance. "That's incredible," the zookeeper said softly, crouching down beside Sarah. "I've worked here for 5 years, and I've never seen Binti do this. He's usually so reserved with visitors." Sarah couldn't find words to respond. She just kept her hands against the glass, drinking in the impossible comfort of this moment. The zookeeper continued, her voice gentle. "Binti lost his mate, Kamari, 3 years ago. He grieved for months, wouldn't eat, wouldn't interact with the others. We were really worried about him." She paused, watching the silverback's focused attention on Sarah. But eventually, he found his way back. He takes care of his family now, watches over the young ones. He's the heart of this troop. Sarah finally looked at the zookeeper, her eyes red and swollen. "How?" she asked, the single word containing 1,000 questions. "How did he keep going?" The zookeeper smiled, sadly. "I don't know if I can explain it, but I watched him every day during that time, and what I saw was he let himself feel it, all of it. He didn't run from the grief, but he also didn't let it be the only thing. He found purpose in protecting the others, in being present, in living even when living hurt." Sarah looked back at Binti, who was still holding his vigil, his hands pressed against the glass. Still present, still there. "Animals teach us things we forget," the zookeeper said, "about resilience, about the fact that grief and life can coexist, that you can carry loss and still show up, still be gentle, still be strong." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, that crushing weight that had made breathing feel like drowning. It didn't disappear, but it shifted, made room for something else. For the first time in 3 months, Sarah thought about tomorrow. Not with hope, exactly. Not with joy, but with the barest possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could survive. She slowly lowered her hands from the glass. Binti watched her, and after a moment he lowered his hands too. But he didn't leave. He sat there, maintaining eye contact, until Sarah finally stood up on shaky legs. "Thank you," she whispered to him, not caring how crazy it sounded, not caring who was listening. "Thank you for seeing me." Binti's mouth opened slightly, showing teeth that could rend flesh in what almost looked like a gentle yawn. Then he made one more soft rumbling sound before standing up and moving back toward his family group. Sarah watched him rejoin them, the two females greeting him with gentle touches, the juvenile clambering onto his back. A family, functioning despite loss, living despite grief. She turned to leave, her legs still trembling, her heart still shattered but somehow beating with more purpose than it had in months. As she walked toward the exit, she passed a family with a little girl about Emma's age, arguing about which animal to see next. The instinct to fall apart came immediately, that crushing reminder of what she'd lost. But Sarah took a breath, deep and deliberate, and let it pass through her instead of crushing her. In the parking lot, she sat in her car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd been avoiding. "Mom," she said when her mother answered, her voice barely audible, I need help. I can't do this alone anymore." Her mother's sob of relief was immediate. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm coming right now." Sarah hung up and looked back at the zoo entrance. Somewhere in there, a gorilla named Binti was going about his day, carrying his own losses, showing up for his family, being present despite the pain. If he could do it, maybe she could too. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. The note she'd written that morning, the one explaining why she couldn't continue, was still on her kitchen counter. When she got home, with her mother's arms around her, she tore it into pieces and threw it away. Sarah's healing didn't happen overnight. Grief doesn't work that way. It's not linear, not neat, not something you overcome like a hurdle. It's something you learn to carry, like Binti carried his loss. Some days were unbearable. Some mornings she still woke up and forgot, for one beautiful second, that Emma was gone, and then remembered, and the pain was fresh all over again. But she kept going. She started your therapy, really committed to it this time, instead of just showing up physically while being absent mentally. She joined a grief support group for parents who'd lost children. She let her mother stay with her, accepting help instead of pushing everyone away. And once a week, every Wednesday morning when the zoo was quiet, she went back to see Binti. She never told anyone what had happened that first day. People would think she was crazy, projecting human emotions onto an animal. But Sarah knew what she'd experienced, and Binti seemed to know too. Each visit, he would come to the glass when he saw her. Sometimes he would press his hand to hers. Sometimes he would just sit there, present and calm, and Sarah would sit on her side, finding in his steady presence a kind of peace she couldn't find anywhere else. The zookeeper, whose name was Diana, became a friend. She'd share stories about Binti, about his gentle nature despite his immense strength, about how he'd saved a child who fell into the enclosure years ago, carrying the boy to safety with impossible tenderness. "He understands vulnerability," Diana said once. "He protects it. That's rare, even in humans." 6 months after that first encounter, Sarah did something she never thought she'd be able to do. She sorted through Emma's room, not to erase her, never that, but to transform the shrine back into a space she could enter without collapsing. She kept Emma's favorite books, her artwork, the stuffed gorilla she'd gotten at the zoo that birthday, but she also packed some things away, creating a memory box instead of a museum. And through it all, she thought about Binti, about resilience, about the fact that grief and life aren't mutually exclusive. They're woven together, inseparable, and maybe that's okay. A year after that October morning, Sarah went back to work. Not her old job. She couldn't face that yet. But she started volunteering at the zoo, helping with educational programs. She wanted to be close to the animals, close to that raw, honest way of existing that humans often complicate, and she wanted to help other people see what she'd seen. That connection transcends species, that empathy lives in places we don't expect, that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the most unlikely teachers. She still missed Emma every single day. That never changed. The grief never disappeared. But she learned to carry it, the way Binti carried his. She learned that you can be broken and whole at the same time, that you can honor loss while still choosing life. On the second anniversary of Emma's death, Sarah stood in front of Binti's enclosure with a small bouquet of flowers. Not for the gorilla, that would be ridiculous, but for herself, a ritual, a moment of acknowledgement. Binti came to the glass, as he always did. They pressed their hands together, a greeting that had become sacred between them. And Sarah smiled, a real smile, perhaps the first in 2 years. "Thank you," she said, as she did every week, "for that day, for showing me that I could survive this." Binti tilted his head, those ancient eyes holding hers with the same steady presence he'd offered when she'd been at her lowest. Behind her, a family approached with a young girl who looked about 8. The girl's eyes went wide at the sight of the massive silverback. "Mum, look, he's so big. Is he dangerous?" The mother hesitated, reading the information plaque. "Well, they can be, but—" Sarah turned to them, surprising herself with her own voice. "He's not dangerous, he's protective. There's a difference. He knows how to be strong and gentle at the same time." The little girl pressed her face against the glass, delighted. "I think he's beautiful." "Me too," Sarah said softly. "Me too." As she left the zoo that day, Sarah realized something profound. Binti hadn't fixed her. He hadn't erased her pain or brought her daughter back. He'd done something more important, something more real. He'd seen her, truly seen her in her darkest moment, and he'd shown her that she wasn't alone in her suffering, that grief is universal, crossing species and circumstance, that the capacity for empathy, for connection, for choosing to be present despite pain, these things live in all of us if we're brave enough to show them. Emma would be 8 years old now if she'd lived. Sarah would never stop wondering who she would have become. But she'd also started to understand that love doesn't end with death. It transforms. It finds new expressions. It becomes part of who we are and how we move through the world. And sometimes it speaks to us through the most unexpected messengers. A 400-pound gorilla who pressed his hand to glass and held it there, telling a broken woman what she needed to hear without speaking a single word. "I see you. You're not alone. You can survive this." Because empathy doesn't require words. Connection doesn't require language. And sometimes the most human thing we can experience comes from a creature we call wild. Binti taught Sarah that strength isn't about not breaking. It's about showing up even when you're broken. That being present for others, even through your own pain, is the most powerful thing you can do. That grief and love are two sides of the same coin, and carrying one means honoring the other. Sarah still visits him every week. She probably always will. Not because she needs him to fix her anymore, but because he reminds her of something essential. We're all just trying to navigate loss and love, pain and purpose, and sometimes we find healing in the most unexpected places. Sometimes we find it in the eyes of a gentle giant who saw our pain and reached back. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that connection can come from the most unexpected places, that healing is possible even in our darkest moments, consider subscribing to hear more stories that touch the heart and awaken the soul. Because every life, every loss, every moment of unexpected grace, they all matter, they all connect us, and they all deserve to be shared. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, and thank you for believing that even in our brokenness, we're never truly alone.